Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning, and welcome to For the Record. Today being Monday, the 11th day of September 2017. I trust that everyone had a safe and enjoyable weekend. A little windy in the Cayman Islands, the effect from Hurricane Irma. I think we had some rough seas as well, what we would normally call a norther. We had one of those I saw where parts of the streets were closed off on Harbor Drive as well. So I trust everyone was safe. Again, we want to extend our deepest sympathies to loss of life during Hurricane Irma, and also to express our support for all of those countries that have been devastated and that now have to rebuild, go through the whole process of rebuilding again. We also had some loss of life here in the Cayman Islands, as a result of natural causes. A few more stalwarts again we have lost. Some people know her as Biggie, Miss Florence Berry in Georgetown, and also Miss Lilla Macfield. I think she was something like 103 years old as well. Those are two that I'm aware of, and want to extend our sympathies to those as well. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles, as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. Of course, For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I'm your host, Orit Connor. My co-host in the studio with me this morning, Dr. Steve Macfield. Ms. Teresa is not with us this morning, and you're welcome to join us in the conversation every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally it is that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. This morning it's Mr. Paul Akai. He's the one with us. Miss Susan is not with us as well. You're welcome to join us in the conversation by calling us, courtesy of our toll-free number provided by Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, then you can email us at fortherecord, that is one word, fortherecord, at candw.ky. I want to mention some of my domino partners and players, some of them not necessarily my partners because I usually play against them and they want to give me a 6-low and I try to give them a 6-low. Mr. Graham Rankin, belated happy birthday. His was yesterday. Carl Hudson, his was a week before that as well. And I believe that TC will be enjoying one fairly soon in the next few days as well. So I want to wish a happy birthday to them and to anyone else who may have a birthday today or one coming up or may have had one recently as well. I want to say good morning to my co-host, Dr. Steve Macfield. Dr. Macfield, September 11th, with so many other things going on throughout the world, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that September 11th is a historic day and one that will be etched in our memory, forever in terms of what occurred in the United States on September 11, 2001. That will certainly be etched in our memories, as well.
Well, good morning to you, Mr. For the Record, and good morning to your listeners here locally, and good morning to those people listening abroad. I want to also give my condolence to Miss Biggie family, and of her passing, and I want to give a special condolence to Miss Lilla's family. We're family.
Yes, yeah.
I think she was one of the oldest members of family that were living until her decease. And all right, I can remember I must have been around 6 years old then. I think it was 6 years old then when the news came back, and I remember all the women out in front of my grandfather's gate, and they were all weeping and crying about the loss of her husband Woodley McFeel, who went down with the Majestic in 1941. I was born in 1935, so I must have been 6 years old. But I remember that as clearly as sitting here. All of those women there, and I've heard that Mr. Woodley was lost, and the sadness of that it brought to the whole island when the Majestic went down with Captain Stade Mountbatten as captain, and Mr. Woodley McFeel was the cook, which was our cousins, and Miss Lilla was out there with her sister Miss Annie, and they were Miss Annie Connor, and they were really weeping, and so I remember that, and so as I heard that about her death, that flashed right through my mind this morning, and she was a real patriarch of the McFeel family. She knew a lot of the history, and I think one of the things I really regret, is not getting to her before she died. So I could have a tape recording of all the things that she had carried on with her as she passed on. I also would like to give say happy birthday to my friend Graham Rankin. He hasn't come to see me yet.
Okay.
But
you can bet he'll be there.
He'll be there before the day's out. He always comes 2 or 3 times a week to check on me to see what I'm doing. So, Lord Graham, happy birthday to you and to your family, and may you have a great day, and may you continue to reign in your fiefdom. I also, the September 11th is a day also for us, because remember that's when we had the start of Hurricane Ivan in 2004,
yes.
and so for us and the Americans, it's a sad time, and also what's happening now with the 3 hurricanes in this basin, this Caribbean basin. I understand it's a phenomenon that only occurs. I think it occurred sometime 7 or something years ago. They said to have 3 hurricanes at one time, and my condolence goes out to all of those people who lost their lives in a hurricane in the Caribbean and in the United States. It's as I sat and watched the pictures on the television, I was really sad and really see how blessed we are that we did not get the blunt of that hurricane that it passed us, because I don't know how we would have survived, because that was a real devastating storm.
Okay. And we see where the Cayman Islands really has come forward and rendered support. The police helicopter sent to Turks and Caicos Islands with a crew of 4 and a contingent of police officers who traveled on to Barbados, and then along with the other British troops were going to be sent to places like the British Virgin Islands. I saw a WhatsApp from a friend of mine who went along, and yesterday morning he was preparing then to leave from Barbados to go to the British Virgin Islands to assist there as well. Total devastation, which brings me to the point we're going to have the Finance Minister, Honorable Roy McTaggart, in with us this morning. He should be in here at 8 o'clock, so we'll have him after the news and to talk about various issues. I'll have a few questions for him, as well. But the whole idea, I've read articles in the various newspapers, a lot of the British newspapers as well, talking about the UK's responsibility for its overseas territories and the assistance that should be given. I see where one minister responded and said basically, our response was as good as the other nations, meaning the Dutch and the French. But that is really not the point. Their response should not have to be as good. It must be better
yes.
than what anyone else is doing. And we need to look at whether or not we're in the Caribbean. We know that we're susceptible to hurricanes. Whether or not as a group of nations we couldn't keep the Federation together. We have CARICOM, which there are some question marks about CARICOM's effectiveness. But looking at pooling our financial resources in such a way that when natural disasters hit like this, that we can help ourselves or we can help each other. So the same way that we have an environmental fund, and there are times when we're able to access that environmental fund because of a hurricane, because there is also the risk of damage to the environment. Shouldn't we have a dedicated fund for natural disasters and every year put money in that kitty just the same way that we're supposed to do, and we do, even though we don't do it to the extent that the experts say that we should do it for our pensions, but we should put some money in that kitty every year. It stays there. It's a dedicated fund. You can't dip into it for anything else, so that when these disasters occur, at least you have some start at money. We see some of these countries in the Eastern Caribbean, and they talk about how much it's going to cost to rebuild. It will be interesting to see how many of them can actually dip into their national coffers and have money, or whether or not they have to extend their hands to the international community, to the mother country, for assistance.
I think it's going to be an extension of the hand. I don't think they could be able to dip. I don't think they have enough pockets to dip in, because I've been to some of those countries many different times, and they're quite poor. The majority of the population is quite poor, and of course, some of our people are getting to be that way now too. Although we have an insurance fund that they are able to share, but I don't think that's not enough. That really, and I agree with you that there should be some sort of disaster fund down to the Caribbean. But that goes to show you how disassociated we are with each other. We don't realize that we are all family to each other.
Mm-hmm.
That we are all brothers and sisters in one area. I think that's the mistake we made when we walked out and we allowed the Federation to collapse. I think this should bring us closer together now, because this is not something that happens that happens as once in every a century. This is something that will happen every year. It is a yearly problem that we have for 6 months out of the year, and I think that we ought to sit down with our brothers and sisters around the Caribbean and try to find a common ground in which we can pool some resources to help each other in times like this. Those who believe that the Great Britain or the United Kingdom is going to really help them, I don't think that they're going to help them any more than just a token help, as you said, as well as other people. We are called British Overseas Territories, so we belong to them, and therefore they should be helping us, and they should be helping all of those other territories who now are in need of them. But we'll see how much they help, and we'll see how much they stretch their hands out with us. I already read in the newspaper that they are telling us, don't send any clothes, secondhand clothes and goods. Send money because that's what they are going to need to rebuild their country. It's to especially St. Martin. I know a lot of those leaders because I've been in international forums with them, and I know that they're dedicated. Most of them are dedicated to their people and are always looking to make their people better off.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Stuart Connor. My co-host in the studio with me this morning, Dr. Steve Macfield. We're going to a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I am your host, Stuart Connor. My co-host with me this morning, Dr. Steve Macfield, and we're running ahead of time. We said we would have Minister Roy McTaggart in with us at 8 o'clock or after the 8 o'clock news, but we're very fortunate and privileged to have him here with us now. So without any further ado, I want to say good morning, sir, and welcome back to For the Record in your new capacity now.
Thank you very much, Josie, and really a privilege for me to be on here this morning. And thank you very much too for the good wishes. Good morning to you too, to your co-host for the day.
Good morning to you too, sir.
Glad to see you,
Minister McTaggart. Good morning to you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We have one caller. They must have heard that you got in early, so they're calling already. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I will patiently just listen to your comments this morning, and Mr. McTaggart, finance is very important to the Cayman Islands, and wishing you all the best in your new role.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
You're welcome. Well, we were talking, and I heard you all saying, to me, she's Grandma Lilla. That her birthday would have been today. She would have been 104.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who do not know who we're referring to, it's Miss Lillian Pearson. She was Macfield prior, and but her maiden name is Bush. But her birthday would have been today, so our family is saddened. But I also want to send out a greeting to her great-granddaughter, Marzita Bodden, who was born on her birthday. And wishing her all the very best. And, we have so much to be thankful for pertaining to the hurricane and stuff. Downtown was roped off sometime yesterday. And, the storm was a distance away, yet we felt the effect. So that just tells you how much we need to be thankful for, on this anniversary of Hurricane Ivan. I just want to make an appeal to our Cayman community to always be prepared. Don't wait. I know last weekend when they said we weren't going to get any groceries in, the stores were packed, and, the next day, the shelves were empty in a lot of the stores. So, just take your time, and each week when you go to shop, just buy some of your supplies and have them, make sure that the expiry date is nowhere near, so you can have them in your cupboard for, the whole hurricane season. We still have, over 2 months into the season. So just take your time, and each time you go out there, go to shop, just buy some of your supplies, and make sure you have flashlights and batteries and stuff, because not only in times of an emergency, but your electricity could go off at any time. So those things are very handy, and we need to always just be prepared in our community. And as the Red Cross and other groups are making appeals for help for the other Caribbean islands, we want to, just render any support that we can to help our neighboring Caribbean islands who was so devastated.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Today, I want to say, just have a good day, and God bless the Cayman Islands and the world.
Thank you very much,
we
caller.
have so much family and friends all over the world.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Thank you. I see where in one of the BVI newspapers, they've indicated that over 100 workers will be coming from throughout the Caribbean to assist them with restoring electricity in the British Virgin Islands as well. Minister, before you arrived, we were talking about the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility.
Yes.
And I see where they have indicated that the amount of $15.6 million will be allocated to the various countries that were affected by Hurricane Irma. They said basically that they're likely to pay out Antigua and Barbuda $6.7 million, Anguilla $6.5 million, and St. Kitts and Nevis $2.2 million. They hadn't indicated yet what would happen with the Turks and Caicos, because I don't think that they knew the extent of the damage at that point in time, and they expect that that money they would receive the money within a 14-day period at most. That does not include the flood damage. And very quickly, before we go to our 8 o'clock news, maybe you can tell us, where does the Cayman Islands stand as far as the CCRIF, if we're still paying into that? Because I know that there were some people who were critical about us paying, but it's like any insurance that you take out. You take out a motor car insurance, you're hoping that you don't get into an accident, but if you do, then at least you have the coverage. If you don't, then you think that it is money wasted, but you only know that it isn't money wasted when you do have an accident and you need it. Where does the Cayman Islands stand as far as subscribing to the CCRIF?
Thank you, OC. Very good question, because as I was coming in, I was listening to the discussion. I said, you know what, that's a good place I need to pick up on when I do get here. But yes, this fund does exist, and it is paying out. I received a notification as well last week that these payments were taking place. Happy to say that Cayman continues to be a part of it. We have been so from day one when it was established in 2007. And about as much else I can really say about it, I don't know a whole lot about the fund, just as it exists. Mm-hmm. We pay about $500,000 a year in premiums. So we are, members of it, strong supporters of it, believe in it. I think, unfortunately, even up to at this point, not all Caribbean countries are members of this program. And I'm hoping that will change.
Yes.
I think, too, it has been further expanded, and they're starting to look at to bring in some of the Central and South American countries as well into the program. So it's one that I think, is extremely important. What these countries are getting out of it is not going to anywhere near deal with the extent of the catastrophe they feel. Yes. But what it does is that it puts a lump sum of money in their hands that they can start with that recovery and get things going. But given the scale of the disaster and the estimates coming out now, it's it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. One of the criticisms of that fund initially was the formula that they used for payouts. And then they went about reforming that, because it always seemed as if you were paying in, but when it came to measurements of wind speed and making assessments and stuff like that, countries just simply didn't qualify. And they came in for a lot of criticism about that, especially I think it was in Turks and Caicos after Hurricane Ike there as well. So they have reformed all of that now, when we see now what some may consider more liberal policies in terms of payout, because they were collecting a whole lot of money but not paying any out, and people were questioning what's the purpose of having the insurance fund if we're paying into it. And I must say that initially, when this fund was being established, there were one or two Caribbean countries that could not afford to, and countries like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and BVI assisted them in paying that initial premium to help them on their way as well. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Howard Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, the Minister for Finance, the Honorable Roy McTaggart, and my co-host with me is Dr. Steve Macfield. Please stay tuned. We're going to headline news. When we return, the conversation will continue with the Honorable Minister. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. It is my pleasure to have in the studio with us this morning, the Honorable Roy MacTaggart, who's the Minister of Finance and Economic Development. Before we pass the mic back over to the Minister, we have one caller, so we're going to take that caller first. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good day.
Good day.
Good morning to all. This is Suzanne Boswell calling.
Yes, ma'am. Recognize that beautiful voice.
Wearing my hat as a citizen, of course.
Okay.
I just had a question. It's about, of course, we've seen the destruction in Harvey and Wilma. Particularly, my two concerns are, have we actually assessed how many people, homeowners in Cayman, actually have house insurance and how many are not covered? And secondly, has the government here ever considered a national sort of disaster fund? Because if we have high levels of uninsured people who are going to have damaged homes, in Ivan we had over 90% damage to our homes. I just want to know what kind of plans the government are thinking about, what kind of strategic planning the government is thinking about moving forward, because my understanding is with global warming that the intensity of the storms, you're going to have more extreme weather conditions. So things like Wilma may not necessarily be a once-in-a-lifetime or once-in-a-generation storm. They might actually happen more frequently than we would like to have. And I just want to know what sort of safeguards Cayman is putting in place for itself, because I think if Ivan taught us anything, whilst it's good to have neighbors who will help, you have to be prepared for yourself, and you have to fend for yourself, and you have to fund yourself out of a hurricane preparedness, out of hurricane relief after the fact. So I just have those questions. And finally, one more question was about whether or not we would even consider any sort of storm surge insurance for the whole country. I think that's something like what FEMA has. I know it's a huge different scale, but storm surge seems to be one of the things that we forgot about hurricanes and that caused tremendous damage. And I just want to know what sort of, if there's any consideration, any national flood insurance that could happen in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some very, very, very good and pertinent questions. The last one first, I'll just mention that in, watching everything over the weekend, reading and everything else, the indications are that 9 out of 10 persons who are killed in a storm, it is as a result of storm surge, not the wind. So storm surge certainly, is an important and relevant factor.
Yeah.
Minister?
Well, I have to agree with you completely. I've seen those numbers myself as well. But I think we're getting back to her questions. I mean, I would say that government probably does not have the information as to who is insured and who isn't insured. I don't think that it exists. Within those that are uninsured, I think there are two categories. Basically, those that can't afford the insurance, and secondly, those that choose not to insure. And what those numbers are, I just don't know. But in terms of preparedness for a catastrophe, OC, what I would say is there is no specific fund that we have set aside that I'm aware of for it. How we have and how we are dealing with things like this is through the framework for fiscal responsibility, which requires us to have 90 days of cash available in the event of a catastrophe. And, we exceed that number by a wide margin at this point in time. And, so because of the surpluses and the efforts of this government and the previous one to make sure that we comply and keep ourselves in compliance with that framework.
In dollars and cents, have we quantified that? How much is that 90 days?
That 90 days, that's a quarter. It's in rough terms, we spend about $600 million a year. So it'd be about $150 million that we would have set aside.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's a substantial sum of money to just have it sitting there. But it's there as a self-insurance against catastrophes like this. The issue, too, of global warming and the rising tides and the strength of hurricanes, it is one that I think everyone is focused on. I think, we learned a lot of lessons from Ivan. And what you see happening today is that homes are being and businesses are being built up to higher than they were before, in an effort to raise that and prevent a reoccurrence with these sort of natural disasters. And the strength to the buildings themselves are being built better to withstand hurricanes and these natural events and catastrophes. So a lot is being done. But of course, you can never predict. So just as we're building things 14 feet above sea level now, you can be assured that at some point, you are the likelihood of having a hurricane or move through, and it takes your floodwaters are at 16 feet is there. There is that risk, and there always will be. And so it's impossible really to prepare for any for all eventualities and all potentials. But you take the steps that you can and make sure that you deal with things, I think, in the most effective and efficient way that you can. And I think that's what I see we have done and are doing, in the days since, years since Hurricane Ivan.
Now, the same way that we require people to have motor vehicle insurance, should we be looking at requiring? We know, for instance, if you have a loan with a financial institution, they're likely to require you to have insurance on that. Not only that, they're likely to require you to have personal insurance as well, life insurance as well. Do we need to start looking at whether or not all households should have some form of insurance policy to mitigate against additional expenses for the government?
Yeah. See, the issue that I see is one of cost. In the United States, and I think the caller was talking specifically about flood insurance.
Yes.
The U.S. has a flood insurance program, but it is run by the federal government. And for one reason, and one reason alone, the cost of it, if it was to be done by the private sector, makes it impossible for people to pay the premiums that would be required. So the government is taking that risk with regard to this flood insurance. Then they are voting, Congress is voting now for major sums to deal with the catastrophes that they now have on that they're now facing. So, you think about it, if you've got comprehensive house insurance and hurricane damage, it should cover you against those flood damages. Now, having said that, I'm aware and heard anecdotal stories of, the effects of Hurricane Ivan that, insurance companies locally tried to avoid paying out.
Under insurance.
Either it was under insurance or it didn't cover flood.
Yeah.
Well, flooding is one of the natural consequences of a hurricane. And so they shouldn't be allowed to do that if that is actually what happens. If you have hurricane insurance, it should cover you for wind, it should cover you for water, whatever the effects of that hurricane are.
Okay. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
And
Morning.
good Honourable Minister.
Morning.
A few points either to correct or clarify. Kind of alarmed about what I heard you saying. First of all, we're not building for 14 feet above sea level. We are only building 8 feet above sea level. And what's concerning me more than anything else is that if we have another Ivan-type event, we are not going to experience the level of rebuilding that we did the last time. Because having been a facility manager for over 15 years now, I can tell you, and having worked for the corporate world, all corporations who are devastated or significantly affected, which we consider pretty much we're all during Ivan, now have contingency plans. And all those plans are that they are highly mobile and they have evacuation plans, even for their staff. And some of them have actually even relocated critical infrastructure to other jurisdictions that are considered, quote unquote, safer. So that's thing one. I think it's realistic to say that you probably the only significant rebuilding or fixing you'll see going on there are that of the Dart. They do an amazing job. They are the ones who are building to withstand these types of events because they can afford to do so. I think what the minister, and I'm not saying that he's done this purposely or anything, this is not an attack on him, has failed to realize is that the Caymanian people no longer have this disposable income. So a lot of them are operating. Those who manage to squeak by and actually pay off their mortgages, a lot of them don't have insurance. Okay, one of the easiest ways to find out who does and who doesn't have insurance in terms of the destitute and the indigent is by just adding an extra survey in the needs assessment office where people who are getting government stipends, and just ask them, those who do have properties, if they actually have insurance on theirs. But we are not going to have a situation where rebuilding is going to happen again. And I think to the previous caller's point, or certainly I'm going to make it mine, is that the government needs to consider putting some sort of fund in place, simply because you're operating your fund you referred to having 90 days of operating is for government to operate, not to operate and rebuild. So it's your operating costs there. So therefore, I personally don't count those funds towards disaster recovery, simply because we're talking about not just paying payroll and not just paying utilities, but actually rebuilding for government's own infrastructure as well as the people of the Cayman Islands, because our salaries are not going up, and they have not been going up for over 2 decades, and as a result, the population are having less and less to live with. So I thought I'd bring those points up there.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Minister, we're going to go to a commercial break, and when we return, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to the points made by that caller as well. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In studio with me this morning, my co-host Dr. Steve MacPhail, and we have the pleasure of having the Honourable Roy MacTaggart, who is the Minister of Finance and Economic Development, with us as well. We have one caller on hold. We're going to give the Minister an opportunity to respond to the points made by the last caller, and then we will go to the other caller. Minister.
Okay, I mean, he first, the caller, thank him too for the call. I try to see if I can remember everything he was talking about, but talked about briefly about, he said instead of, he was at Kalam because I'd said 14 feet, it's actually 8 feet. I didn't mean it to be a precise that I know, but the fact of the matter is we are building higher today than we were back before Ivan, and it's to try and to deal with the risks of flooding. But he also said that the country would not be rebuilt after if we had another natural disaster like that firms would leave, they have contingency plans. And yes, I know about them very well, because in my former firm, we have them too, had them too. And the contingency plans are not, generally speaking, to move and not come back, but they are designed to evacuate your staff out of the country in the event of a natural disaster, like a hurricane, just like happened back in Ivan. It was a mass evacuation. And to give government and businesses a chance to rebuild, because it is necessary after to evacuate your profession, your business people, so that for business continuity reasons, primarily. If you aren't able to deliver that for your country, and the businesses aren't able to deliver that, they go out of it. They will fold very quickly. And so those are the reasons why why they have these evacuation plans. But the plans are not to go and not come back. Some may not, they may choose not to, but that happens in the normal course of your business cycle and business anyway. We see businesses come here and open up, we see them close and they move on. So I don't think it'll be significant and would be any significantly different if we were to experience another natural disaster. And I think you would see the country rebuilt just as quickly than as with another disaster.
In response to his comments about the $150 million, the 90 days of funding that the government needs to continue. And he talked about salaries and things of that nature. Aren't those things already covered in terms of the budgetary allocation?
Yes.
Are they're completely separate from that $150 million?
Well, it is because that 90 days of revenue, it just sits there, and then you have all the other cash you need for your operating activities, and that's why at this point our the number of days of cash we have available, it is far in excess of that. So it doesn't have the relevance that I think he was postulating.
Okay, let's go to the next caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Thanks for being so patient.
Good morning, Mr. O.C.
Good morning, sir.
morning.
How are you?
Good morning, Dr. Steve.
Good
and
morning,
good
Mr.
morning,
Debo.
Honorable Roy McTaggart.
Good morning to you, sir.
Thank Radio Cayman for putting on these shows. And thank Honorable McTaggart for coming on here and enlightening us on some things. First of all, I think planning after Hurricane Ivan, planning should change the laws and don't allow anybody to build on the ground. Hurricanes, you got to think about flooding. Okay. They're still building on the ground now and they get flooded. I paid on mine house insurance for 31 years, got destroyed. I didn't collect anything because the company was supposed to have gone under. But the Lord been good to me. Cause my business held up. A business can build back a house, but a house can't build back a business. So the Lord been good to me. And I guess I could go on, but there's other callers there. But this planning should revisit their planning requirement and don't make people build on the ground. Build up. They're very particular about the height of your ceiling, but the foundation, no. So you all have a blessed day, and Lord bless this island.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ivan, for that. Minister, if you want to respond to that caller, and then we want to get on to your agenda in terms of what you want to discuss as well.
That's okay. I honestly don't mind as well with this because this is an interesting conversation as well. But I reflect upon what he had to say. And it's unfortunate that that he had that kind of an experience that when she had paid insurance when it was time to collect, he was not able to because the company had gone out of business. I mean that's most unfortunate. But I think back to OC of our forefathers. How did they build their homes? They were built up on stilts. One of the best examples you have left right now is old Mr. Arthur's shop on North Church Street.
Yes.
And, that's one of the reasons why they did it, was to avoid the floods being there, close to the water. And you can go and look at any old Cayman, just about all the Caymanian homes, older Caymanian homes. They were built up and on stilts and I'm sure it was primarily for that, because the cost, it certainly to me would have probably cost more to build on stilts than it would have to have put it on the natural ground.
Okay. Well, we spoke about relocation. We saw when the eruption of the volcano in Montserrat. The UK was not quick to respond. As a matter of fact, one minister who was responsible for the overseas territory, she lost her job as a result of it. I remember her name quite clearly, Claire Short, because she made some inappropriate comments about Montserrat and the situation there. And she lost her job as a minister responsible for the overseas territories. We see the ability of professional firms to relocate their staff to other jurisdictions. We'll probably see some coming to the Cayman Islands, some just like how we relocated some of ours after Hurricane Ivan. And I'm not sure whether or not you're in a position to speak to this, but would the Cayman Islands also consider accepting some families from other jurisdictions, especially those persons who may have family members residing here in the Cayman Islands on a humanitarian basis, allowing them here. Now, a lot of people would point and say that really should be the responsibility of the UK to do that. But should the Cayman Islands be considering a humanitarian gesture to that extent as well?
Yeah, and good question, Osi, because I asked it as well on Friday, and the unequivocal answer I got is yes. That if there is a need for people to come here to live and to be amongst us for a while until the BVI is rebuilt, then yes, we are prepared to and will accept
or
them.
Montserrat
or any for that. And I look back on what happened in Ivan for us, and other countries were equally as generous and welcoming to people from the Cayman Islands. And at the break I mentioned the case of my own firm at the time, KPMG, where I worked. Following Ivan, the entire office was relocated to Canada. Over 200 people lived and worked there for 3 months. And, the Canadian government opened their arms and welcomed us. I am aware that...
Tell us that little story, tell the audience that little story that you told us about the passports.
Well, the passports, sure, I'll share that. We had and chartered a flight out of company out of Canada. And when that plane came down here to pick up our people, on board was a member from the immigration in Canada, and he had with him a number of passports, which they were prepared to give our people on that flight. If anyone there was in a position where they had they were not properly documented, or proper passports or travel documents, they were prepared to give them a 6-month Canadian passport to allow them to land unhindered in Canada when they went there. Thankfully, that didn't have to happen, but it just shows to some, the generous and very welcoming and thoughtfulness of countries when people are experiencing disasters like this.
Yeah.
And going back in the case of the BVI, and but particularly BVI, because I know that there are a number of firms that are looking to bring their people out when they can get out, to bring them out and relocate them here for a time until business can be reestablished in the BVI before they go back.
Okay. Dr. Steve, you have any question for the minister?
No. The only things I have, I'm hoping for him to get to the specific, to the
SBS?
SBS.
Okay.
So that's where I have some questions for the minister.
Let's take a commercial break, and then when we come back, hopefully the minister can get on track and talk about the strategic policy statement and where do we go from there. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me and my co-host, Dr. Steve Macfield, is the Honorable Roy MacTaggart, Minister of Finance and Economic Development, and we're going to pass the mic over to the Honorable Minister.
Thank you, O.C. My primary reason for being here this morning with you all was to discuss the strategic policy statement that government unveiled and delivered to the Legislative Assembly, some nearly 2 weeks ago. The document is one that is required to be submitted by the Public Management and Finance Law. And, when we set about to prepare this statement and also to prepare the budgets that do come afterwards, upon which the budget that is based on this strategic policy statement, because what this policy does is sets out in clear terms the goals and aspirations of the current of the government for primarily the next 3 years. But from this now will be prepared a document that covers 2 years, the fiscal year 2018 and 2019. Now, when we set out to prepare this document and the budgets that will come afterwards, it is underpinned by 3 major policy decisions that government has taken. First off is that we will continue to produce substantial surpluses That will allow us to continue to generate strong cash flows and the ability to continue to fund a lot of the ongoing and demands for new programs and increased capital projects that the government is undertaking. And secondly, we also said that we do not and we will not be imposing any new taxes on the population. And I think certainly to my mind, in my entire life, I can say this, quite confidently, that our country has been through such, so many years without any adjustments in terms of additional taxation upon its people. In fact, I think one of the things we did in the previous government that I was a part of is actually made some reductions in taxes for the people, and those were specifically designed to achieve the widest outcome. So, in other words, to make sure everybody benefited from it, not just one particular group or any subsegment of the population. And then the third underpinning is that there will be no new borrowing to fund any capital or operational type projects. The only borrowing that we will undertake will be in 2019 when the bullet bond matures. We know now that we won't be able to necessarily be able to pay it all off without causing significant duress on the rest of the government's finances and our compliance with the framework for fiscal responsibility. At this point, our projections are that we will safely be able to repay 50% of it. Mm-hmm. So with the way these things work is that, you have that bond of 261 million that will have to be repaid in full. And we will use 50% of our own cash resources, which we have been building since 2013, 12 and 13. And we will then have to borrow another 130,000, so a new loan, which together, the two sums together will be used to pay off the bond.
And that borrowing would come from a different source, not from the bondholders.
I think so. I mean, all of that is going to have to be decided. But, as I said when I delivered the statement, OC, I think government has learned a lesson with it. And from budgeting and managing of the fiscal affairs of the country, it is probably best to have an amortizing loan whereby you pay off principal and interest on an ongoing basis, as you would a mortgage or anything else. The whole history of having these bullet bonds means that if you are going to pay when it matures, you have to be in a position to repay it, and
otherwise you would be rendered in default.
Absolutely.
And that would affect your credit rating.
Absolutely.
And it would then create problems with the bondholders in terms of lawsuits
Yes.
and everything else.
Yeah. But what from what, even if we were to have put ourselves in a position of had we started from day one to appropriate, set aside the funds to pay that in full when it matures, what it would have meant that you would have had to appropriate that every year. And what it meant and would have to us is that those funds would have been restricted from any sort of use by the government if it actually needed to do so, to pay, to use it for other sources and for other other items. So in order to effectively have done it, we would have had to start it from day one in 2009 to setting these sums aside. And it didn't happen until, I think, 2013 or 14. Once we, went with the previous government, they started setting aside some sums. But again, the amounts are not that significant. It's all in the surplus cash, lumped up in the surplus cash that we have at this moment.
And you did say that we could pay it off, but it would cause disruptions in terms of our financing, as well as staying within the framework for fiscal responsibility as well. It would be like you have $200,000 and your mortgage outstanding mortgage is $200,000. You decide, okay, I'm going to pay it off, but then you're left with nothing in your pocket after.
Absolutely.
For the man on the street, that would be the equivalent of it.
That's really what it would be like, and you'd end up having to go right back and either get some sort of short-term borrowing or debt financing anyway. So that is a situation that we see right now and what we are forecasting. But what I would say to the public, OC, is not to get hung up on the fact that we're saying it's 50%. That's what our current forecasts tell us that we can safely do. And the philosophy of our government is that we want to be prudent and conservative in what we do. I don't want to be aggressive and say, we're going to pay down 75% and put ourselves at risk. So the actual amounts that we will be able to redeem from our own resources will depend on what the facts and circumstances are as we get closer to that maturity period. And you see how the economy is performing. If we can afford to pay more, we could do it. And if we find that things economically are not as good as we are forecasting them to be, or if things are turning out differently in a negative way, we may have to repay less. But please, it's not a hard and fast number at this point. It's what we have and what we are forecasting that we will prudently be able to accomplish when it does mature.
Okay. Now, in your very quickly in your strategic policy statement and in relation to the cash reserves, you spoke about the fact that it had to do with. Okay, here's the quote. This ratio is calculated on it says the PMFL requires that the government have liquid cash reserves of not less than 90 days of estimated executive expenses. This ratio is calculated at the point in the financial year when government's liquid cash reserves are expected to be at their lowest, typically the 31st of December of each year. Can you explain that to our audience?
Yeah. Well, what that really means, when the British government, when the framework for fiscal responsibility was implemented, this was one of the clauses. They gave us the method in which to calculate the number of days of revenue that of cash reserves that you had to have. And one of the things they said it stipulated was that it had to be done on December 31st, when your cash reserves were at their lowest for us. And what that meant was that the situation could arise where the amount of cash which you are forced to set aside to meet the 90 days could have left you in the same situation when that you might not have had sufficient resources available to fund the ongoing operations of the government. Happily, that just never has materialized for us, because for the first, we made a commitment when we were elected that we were going to comply by the June 30th, 2016, and happily we were able to accomplish that. So it never has been an issue or a problem. Now, my view is, as from an accounting standpoint, my background, is that the better way and an easier way would have been to do that calculation make on an average of your cash position throughout the year, rather than one point in time. Because your cash flow is fluctuating, your cash position fluctuates up and down throughout the year. And for us in government, it's even more pronounced here in Cayman in terms of our budget, because of the nature of our taxation, our business. We collect the majority of our revenue in the first 3 months of the year. And then it starts to taper off in the April period, and then from June to the end of the year, the outflow is quite remarkable and significant. So we build up reserves for the first 6 months of the year in terms of we build up cash, and then the second part of the year, when the revenue coming in is not as significant, the cash reserves depleted, so that it's quite stark. But you don't see that when you are calculating it and on the basis of what the position is on one day of the year, and you're not able to take any account of or factor in any of those days when you really have some really flush cash with it. So it is unfortunate, but it's not at this point a very big deal for us in terms of managing the affairs of the government, because the economy has performed well, and I have to say I believe that we have managed things quite prudently fiscally for us to get us to the point where we are compliant now in all of the requirements of the framework for fiscal responsibility. And, again, another one of the big points, too, for us is that we just are going to continue to pay down government debt. And if we're able to do that, it means that the more money that we are going to have from our own, what we're able to generate locally, to be able to fund a lot of the capital projects that we are undertaking.
Okay. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Orit Connor. My co-host in the studio with me, Dr. Steve MacPhail. And we have the pleasure of having with us the Honorable Roy MacTaggart, Minister of Finance and Economic Development. We're going to headline news. When we return, our conversation will continue with the Honorable Minister. Welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Dr. Steve MacPhail and the Honourable Roy MacTaggart, Minister for Finance and Economic Development. Before my colleague poses a question to the Minister, one of our listeners has written in and said, "Good morning. I thought we were on track to repaying the entire bond from our accumulated surpluses based on statements made by the progressive government as recently as during the election campaign. What has changed? Will this affect our credit rating?"
Yeah. Nothing really has changed, OC. And I mean, in the campaign, I don't know that it was categorically stated that we will repay 100%. I remain to be corrected on that. But that's the second part of the question with regard to our credit rating. Absolutely no effect on our credit rating. What would affect the credit rating is if we defaulted. And, Standard & Poor's, I think it was Standard & Poor's or Moody's, they were here just late last year, and they did their, all the rating agencies have reaffirmed our credit rating, which I believe is a AA3, which is extremely high for a country of our size. But it's reflective of the management and reserves that we have built up, and the current liquidity that we do have. I recall it was mentioned to me that statement made by them while they were here. The reason why they couldn't possibly go higher in terms of their rating is because of the lack of diversification of our economy. That restricts their ability to even give us a higher rating, because that lack of a diversification presents certain systemic risks as well. There are any number, dozens of factors that rating agencies look at and consider when it comes to them coming up with an estimate of how they rate your country and its ability to honor its debt. And so, basically where we are, we're about midway up the path or the scale of investment grade, as a sovereign, as a nation, which, I can tell you number of countries and even big companies that you think of in the world that don't have a rating of a AA3, and it's a testament, I think, to where we are and how the economy over the years has been managed.
Okay. We have one caller. We're going to ask that caller to hang on for a minute. We want to give Dr. Steve MacPhail an opportunity.
Take the call.
Sure?
Yes.
Okay. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Dr. Steve has deferred to you.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Steve. Good morning, Mr. MacTaggart.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Okay. You all doing okay?
Yes, sir.
We're
Fine,
lucky
thanks.
we didn't get that hurricane. Mr. McTaggart, what do you meant by lack of diversity to offer a greater rating? We got from, I think, is the Moody rating.
Yeah.
What do you meant by when he said that?
But basically, the country's economy is underpinned by two industries, basically the financial services and tourism. And
Correct.
there's no at this point
That's what I thought, because we don't produce anything,
Yes.
manufacture anything. Okay.
Absolutely.
Fair enough. One other question, Mr. McTaggart. With the outstanding debt,
Yes.
well, there's going to be more than one. Sorry. The outstanding debt, especially with the health service, is how great is that at this moment? I mean, at what height have we reached? How much money is outstanding from the health services?
From the health services?
Well, or the medical, the hospital.
What is owed to
You mean what
What
is
is owed to the government?
what is
Yes,
owed
the
to
government debt?
what is owed to the health services authority?
Yes, sir.
I
Sorry,
don't.
the HSE.
Yeah, I don't have the current figures, but
Okay, no
it's a
problem.
fairly
But it's quite a
substantial.
considerable amount, isn't it?
Yes, it is. There's no
Okay.
question that it is.
Have
But
you
I
made
would-
any?
Go ahead.
Have you made any arrangement or asked for some proposal to collect those funds?
I believe
this
that the HSA went out to a proposal a few months ago with regard to seeking the private a response from the private sector to actually try and collect some of these funds for them. They did it once before. I don't think that the program, what I was told was the program was not very effective in recovering these debts, and they are going out now to, are about to or have already awarded another contract to try a second time and see if they can get any better results. The difficulties that they have.
What you're saying, sir, excuse me.
Yeah.
They have already awarded a contract.
I don't want to be held to that, but I believe that is the case, that they did a recent request for proposal to try and identify local firms to award a contract to try and collect some of this old and outstanding debt. But I don't have any first-hand knowledge of what the situation is. What I'm telling you is what I've been told secondhand. The difficulty that I know that anyone trying to collect these debts will have is that a significant portion of it is more than 10 years old, and the more recent amounts are that they're trying to collect. Are small. The amounts are small in numbers in terms of overall dollar value, because I do believe, and certainly from some evidence that I've seen, that the HSA has been doing, making some strong efforts to make sure they get paid one way or another for the services that they perform and deliver, for the citizens of this country. But I mean, my belief, I think that there may even be some legal impediments to recovering debts that are more than a certain time, in terms of their age, may be statute barred. So that again too presents certain issues, to try and overcome.
Well, maybe you don't think it could be the strategy there, those debt collection agencies or whatever they're hiring, is not really a perfect way to collect the debt. Maybe they need some more options, proposed options of ways to collect that debt. That's just my thought.
Yeah, but I mean, can you suggest? I'm happy to take your suggestions of what other options you think that there might be.
At the moment, I'm really not into collecting debt.
Yeah, I understand. I just was trying to see, probing you a bit.
It was just my thought, my thought.
No.
Okay. Anyway, I'll listen on, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you very much,
Thank
caller.
you, sir.
Y'all have a good day.
And what I would say to the caller is, that these debt collection agencies, they do not operate on a fixed fee. They operate on a success rate. So if they collect, they take a percentage of what they collect. So it really is, in my mind, a risk-free and an easy way for the government to deal with some of these things. And what it does, I know that the HSA have their own debt collection staff members dealing with debt collection. It would allow them to focus more on the current debts that they need to work on to prevent them from turning into ultimately bad debts. So they I know that they have been overwhelmed with the issue of trying to collect the bad debts that exist within the HSA.
Okay. One listener wanted to know how would you define the degree of risk that we are at? I'm not sure whether or not this is a risk in relation to our credit rating or what. Maybe some clarification from that listener in terms of the type of risk that you're talking about. I don't know if you mentioned anything about risk.
I can't recall in what context it might have been given, but so I'm not able to comment or to elucidate without any further.
Okay, Doc, let's give you an opportunity for your question.
Okay, Minister McTaggart,
Sir.
In your strategic policy statement under the broad strategic outcomes, you list a number of outcomes. I think you say there are 8 of them, and
right?
Eight outcomes, and the third outcome that you've listed there is the best education opportunities for all of our children. And when I looked at the Premier's presentation on your strategic policy statement, he says that on our third strategic objective is therefore to ensure that we give the best education opportunity to our children. But I see here that then he says, and then this is the Premier speaking now, he said we need to get the basic rights. Students in public schools must have the right materials and supplies. Schools themselves must have appropriate equipment and facilities. In this SPS, we have budgeted an additional $18 million to cover special education, enhancing science, literacy, and math, additional teachers, as well as skills upgrading for 400 teachers and assistants, and for scholarships and youth programs. Well, I wonder, what is the really amount then if there's an additional $18 million to cover special education? What is the overall amount for education to ensure that we give our children the best educational opportunities? Because when you contrast that with, for instance, the prison, it's costing us about $70,000 a year for each prisoner. And I worked out, if you have 100 prisoners, say, with and you they're in prison for over a year, and I know we have more than 100. We have about 200 and something prisoners. 100 prisoners at $70,000 a year costs us $7 million. So already we see that it's costing us more to keep someone in prison than it takes a scholarship to send someone off to keep out of prison. And I wonder whether or not that the money that you have allocated for to give the best educational opportunities to our children is adequate and is enough, because it seems to me that education should be the first top priority. Health and education should be the top priority, and I don't see that into the strategic policy statement.
Okay. Do you have a copy of the statement, sir?
Yes, sir.
You do. Can I ask you to please turn to page 35 of the statement?
Of this?
Of the strategic policy statement.
Yeah.
Oh, turn to page 35.
Okay. 35. I don't have 35. No, I don't have. No, I don't have that program. I don't have.
I can read it. What is there is a table.
No, that should be page 35 in that document that you have
in
there.
that one.
And that one. This
page
is the
35.
Premier's statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is there is a
page 35. The forecast operating expenditure.
Forecast operating expenditure by agency.
By agents. Okay.
If you go down there and look for the Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture, and Lands.
Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture, and Lands. Yes.
You will see that for the forecast for 2018, education is going to get just shy of $115 million out of our budget.
Actually getting $114,710,000.
Right.
Yes.
2019, what do you read, sir?
And 2019, they're getting $117,360,000.
And for 2020?
They're getting $118,860,000.
All right. Now, I just have one other question for you, and I think it's put into perspective for you and for all of our listeners as well. What can you tell me about that figure in comparison to the rest?
That figure in comparison to the rest is about the highest figure.
It is. And
the
that's
next
where I was
figure
trying
is
to get.
Minister of The next figure is Minister of Human Affairs and Immigration.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
So, education is going to consume be the largest single recipient and ministry that benefits from the programs of this government.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm glad you pointed that out to me, because I was very concerned about
I can tell
that.
you, sir, it's a very significant uplift from 2016-17. If you look at right next to it, the very first column, it shows that for 2016-17, it was budgeted $149,896.
Yes.
But that's for 18 months.
Okay.
Okay. So if you roughly 150 million, lop off a third of it, that's 100 million.
Yes.
Okay. So it's moving from about 100 million to 114 million. So increase of, that's about a 14% increase in funding for education for 2018. So, very significant amounts are being, and I think we are delivering on the commitment that we are going to do.
So if you are delivering on that commitment, that is great news for me, and I applaud you for that, Minister. And so how much of that money is going to be spent into vocational education?
Yeah, I can't tell you what the specific allocations are going to be now, Mr. McField, but what I can say is that is a significant outcome that we want to achieve, is to focus on that and delivering programs that are relevant and that are necessary and needed in our community. Now, I learned during the campaign that there exists at least almost 24 vocational training programs in this country, sponsored by SciFec, UCCI. You have the private one program that's being delivered by Superior Auto and others. A number of programs do exist. I think the Public Works is one that has they have a program in place as well. The issue we are seeing is that the take-up isn't there. And what I don't know is whether that's because people don't know about it, or whether the programs aren't in demand, or people just don't want to do those programs. But I mean, we have a hairdresser salon on SciFec. That's there. I've seen pictures of it. So there are these programs that already exist, but there doesn't seem to be very much of a take-up for those programs.
Minister,
we got to take a commercial break now. When we come back, we can throw the other questions out to the minister. Sorry for the interruption, but we have to pay the bills, so we have to take a commercial break. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back
this
shortly.
one is yours.
Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're on our last leg of our discussion with the Honourable Roy McTaggart, Minister of Finance and Economic Development. Dr. Steve McField, my co-host, is along with me. I think I have some clarification now from our listener in relation to the risks that we're at. I think the listener wants to know what are the risks that we are at if we fail to further diversify our economy.
Well, OC, what it does is that it makes your economy and the country particularly exposed to periods where you find, in each of these industries where you do have downturns in the industry. So, like 2008, 2009, you had the financial crisis, and we saw, big contraction there in terms of our economic growth during those few years, and it took a few years for us to come out of that, and depending on the magnitude of the downturn in your tourism market in particular, it can exacerbate the help, and it can help to it. Oh, I'm trying to losing my words here. It can have a significant impact on government finances. Generally speaking, when there is, we have experienced over years when there is a downturn, not necessarily a recession, but an period of economic contraction in the United States, say, for instance, the impact upon us is quite significant because of so much of our economy is directly dependent on U.S. tourism, where we get probably 75-80% of our tourists from, and also in the financial services industry. So we are exposed, but you manage those, try to manage those as best you can. Sometimes there are occasions when there's nothing you can really do. You just got to ride it out. And one of the things we can do, and we have seen happen, is that government itself, in periods of, one of the tools that a government has at its disposal is to help spend the country out of recession. But again, we don't have infinite resources like someone like the U.S. does, that you can implement, big spending programs on infrastructure and stuff. So our ability really to influence in times of a recession or downturn is somewhat constrained. You can spend some money and it will multiply and have an effect, but probably not the effect that is needed to truly make a huge difference in terms of, expanding your economy again.
Okay. One of our listeners wanted to know an explanation for government's position in relation to the private member's motion to double the amount of allowance granted to returning residents, returning Caymanians, in terms of the waiver, what you don't pay duties on. The proposal was that you should double the amount, and they were curious to know whether or not if the request wasn't for doubling and it was for less than that, would the government would they have been amenable to that, or why wasn't some negotiation done in relation to coming to a fair amount, because they still believe that it would help some families if they're able to seek relief or get relief from import.
And I hear the listener. You'll recall in the motion was rejected by the government. Philosophy for us, OC, is this: if we're going to give tax breaks, we want it to benefit everybody, not just those who can afford to travel and go overseas. Not everybody would benefit something like that from that. The second thing it does, it promotes the idea. It promotes the it's a well-established thing in Cayman, norm in Cayman throughout. We like to go for them shopping trips on Miami. But what that does, OC, is take money out of the economy.
But some people will say that they simply can't afford to buy things here in the Cayman Islands, the way that they triple and quadruple their profit margins and the price when they look at it somewhere else.
Well, you got to figure out the fact to it. You're taking money, you got to pay to go overseas. You got to pay for a hotel. You got to pay for a car. You got to pay for everything else. But we don't necessarily consider that when we're doing it. It says, we're going anyway. Well, you have to look at it in its totality in terms of what you really are saving when you do that. But the key to benefit for the economy and country as a whole is not that doesn't help us. And I did some quick calculations, and I came up with just a very broad figure at the time, because I think you have we have 1.2 million people that transit through our shores, go over what are the tourism? They transit through the airport every year, right? That represents 600,000 individuals, because you think they come in and they go out, so that's 2 flights. So it's 600,000. About 400,000 of that is your tourist. Okay, so that leaves you about 200,000 trips overseas by the Caymanian population. Okay, if you take $350,000 or 350, let's take $700, which is what they were asking. 7 divided time, that's 140, 150 million out of the economy. Let me get it right because $350 times, $200,000. Anyway, in any event, it came up to a fairly significant amount in terms of what really gets taken out of the economy. And we already have a very significant balance of payments deficit that we cover by the foreign inward investment that we do get. And that's why it's so important to this economy, because we spend more money with the rest of the world in goods and services than we are able to do. And that's well established and well known. So you have to find a way to balance your balance of payments. And we do it on the back of the foreign inward investment that we take. And so that's why it's so important that these things work together to produce the balance that is needed in the country and in our economy.
Okay. And I guess that is quite significant to Minister McTaggart when you take into account that 25,000 people are working in our economy and they're sending money home every week and every month also.
It is a huge
lot of money
effect.
leaving the Cayman Islands.
It is. I saw figures at one point. It's been a couple years now, Mr. McField, of somewhere in the region of $160 to $180 million in outflow of every year. That's money that's it's made here, but leaves the country every year. So it's a significant drain on the resources that exist.
We're going to take our final call for the morning, and then we want to give the minister an opportunity for some closing comments as well. Two calls, Paul. We were able to take both of them? Okay. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Hope you all okay. Calling about the topic that you're talking about there, the waiving of the duties and stuff brought in by Caymanians. It is a very important topic, but we also need to look at the foreign investors that are getting big breaks, because a lot of their stuff are coming in duty-free and are bought from the U.S., so they get the double as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure a lot of Caymanians are feeling the same thing. And why can we give all these foreigners all these breaks that they can bring in and make money on the backs of Caymanians, and then Caymanians can't get a break either? So we need to take care of charity begins at home. We need to start looking at our own first. And yes, we need to do is start taxing these people, especially the foreigners that are in Cayman that are sending home all their money. There should be income tax somewhere. Cayman doesn't want it, or Cayman doesn't want it, but eventually it's coming to that. Because at the end of the day, when the horse going through the gate, there's nothing we can be able to do about it, because when they take all their money out and send it overseas to better their country, at the end of the day, they're draining our caucus. And then they ended up with dollar source services when they apply for status. Then they're not solvent any longer. Then there comes a burden on our taxes when they send theirs out. I think we also need to look into that also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Minister?
Well, I'll just reflect back on what she said, because I don't believe it's a foreign and Caymanian issue, because expats living here they do get the same benefit, they're eligible for it. The law is that every returning resident gets the $350. And the other comment I would make too: we are not out of line with other countries around in our region with regard to the amount that we allow in here duty free in terms of there. You got some countries, like I think it's Bermuda or BVI, where it's zero. They pay everything on everything that comes in. I don't know what else to say at that point. I can't remember everything that she had said. If there's anything you think I haven't covered.
I think due to concessions was probably the one that you mentioned as well. The fact that we do give due to concessions to businesses, so they're able to purchase in the U.S. at a rate less than they would pay in the Cayman Islands. So they're getting that benefit, and then they're getting the due to concessions when they come here. More to developers, I would imagine.
I think it does, but okay, I hear her, but I hear that then, and that is true. Government does give duty concessions to developers coming in, and it's not specifically to we do it to encourage the inward investment and to encourage the development. And yes, they are direct benefits they receive, but when these projects are done and completed, the rewards to government in terms of the additional revenue that they are able to collect is quite substantial. And by not giving these sort of incentives for development and to developers, you run a very real risk that those investments might not take place and that you don't benefit from it. The thing I would say too, is over the years, Caymanians as well have benefited from incentives and concessions in terms of the local developers. And some choose not to seek them and do it all, and that's fine. I admire them for that. But we do get, requests from local developers for duty concessions on their projects.
Okay, we're going to take the last caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, gentlemen. Kenneth Bryan here.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, OC. Good morning, Dr. Steve.
Good morning. Good morning.
And good morning to the Finance Minister.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
I just chimed in respect to the motion that was brought by the Honourable Opposition Leader, Ezra Miller, in respect to the duty concessions. I think there's an important part that you're forgetting in respect to that motion, which was the motion was calling only for Caymanians to get the increase, not for every resident. So the magnitude of the impact that you're suggesting will always be a lot smaller because the amount of Caymanians that we have left in comparison to the population is different. Also, I don't think you've presented any data whatsoever to put a significant figure to the loss in revenue. I agree with you in respect to it's promoting it, but the reason why it's promoting persons to shop overseas is because of the high prices. And until this administration is prepared to do something to counteract those high prices, you have to give the opportunity for Caymanians to find cheaper pricing, because we agree, you've agreed, the Premier has agreed that the cost of living in Cayman is high. So I'm not sure until you can come up with an argument to show by data what the effect is on the local economy with the numbers of people who leave, how much money they spend. You can't suggest or to use a scare tactic of how much it's going to lose. I think that's a bit unfair when Caymanians are just trying to find softer ways to survive.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion in respect to that. So okay. I want to make sure it's clear that the motion was for Caymanians only.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Colin.
And what I would say from a broad, economic and country as a whole, it narrows the beneficiaries of it. And what I said at the very outset was the philosophy of the government is with any tax breaks, any concession given, we want it to benefit the widest area of the population so that everybody gets their own fair share of it. So yes, it certainly does. And the only information that you can, because it literally does not exist at this point in time, is what the true economic effect is in terms of what the losses are. I can give you some, we can get some broad figures in terms of just using what, as I was trying to do earlier with the total numbers of people. You could, but you have to make some broad assumptions that everybody who travels abroad and comes back in is actually making use of that $350 allowance. And that does not happen. So anything you do in terms of trying to quantify it is highly, it is kind of speculative because simply the hard data just does not exist.
Okay, Minister, I want to thank you very much for making yourself available, and happy to know that we're back on track in terms of having the government be on For the Record on Mondays. Again, I want to give you an opportunity for some closing comments. And within those closing comments, I had another question, and if you can incorporate your answer into that, is that how important is balance or our balance of payments to a small jurisdiction like the Cayman Islands, as opposed to larger jurisdictions where there is trading back and forth, and you enter into trade deals with other countries. How important is?
It's important to every country.
Okay.
It doesn't matter whether you're large or you're small. Mm-hmm. It's particularly acute, I think, for smaller economies, where it and again, it all depends. If you have outflows of currency, in terms of a deficit, you have to finance it. If you're not able to finance that deficit, what you end up having is potentially are restrictions placed on the ability for your population to gain foreign currency to pay for those, the goods and services that they buy overseas. We have been most fortunate. We abandoned foreign exchange controls in 1983, right? So, for the last 35 years, money is free to flow. Most countries do not have that ability because of the significant demands or outflows for foreign currency and the limited money coming into the economy. When you aren't able to match those things, you end up having to borrow to balance it. And that's why you see, a lot of countries today are in the mess that they're in terms of the ballooning debt and limited resources with which to that debt and the repayment of it consuming more and more of your government's resources. So a lot of factors at play there. But we at Cayman have been fortunate, so fortunate, to be able to have generated the what we call the invisible imports that balance things out and make us able to enjoy the freedoms that we do have today from just a pure money flow perspective.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Further closing comments?
All right. Just like to thank you for hosting me. I don't think we got through as much as I would have liked to, and I know Mr. McField sitting
Always
next to me. He's been itching to ask some more questions. I'd be happy to come back. We'll see.
Yes.
I would be happy to come back and discuss more. But what I would say to the country in terms of the SPS here is that these are just your broad parameters. The actual numbers now is where we are crunching final numbers. And I would urge the population populace to wait until the budget comes, because that's where you're going to tell what really now, what the details are in terms of how we spend it. If I could just briefly, I just want to mention, I've heard a lot of comments. People have talked, in terms of education and stuff like that, and heard criticisms that we don't have enough money in this budget to build a John Gray High School for one, and. I've heard comments, I think particularly too from the leader of the opposition. He was on another show saying that he was going to agitate for things to be completed in 2018. Well, the stark realities are that's not achievable. I don't care how you look at it, even if we vote the money, because we don't have plans, we don't have a contract, nothing. It just can't be achieved in that time frame. We will start it in 2018, and the budget that we will come forward will reflect those realities. That it's just simply not achievable for 2018, and it has to be done over a period. So with those comments too, I'd just like to thank you for hosting me and letting me be here, and I wish the people of the Cayman Islands a good week. And I pray too that we will not see any natural phenomenon like hurricanes coming our way for the rest of the season, and God will be gracious to us all. And thank you again to both of you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, my co-host as well. And thanks to our listening and viewing audience for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension for the record, into your homes, into your vehicles, as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers, not only here in the Cayman Islands, but throughout the world as well, and in particular in their time of dire need throughout the Caribbean, those countries that have been affected by Hurricane Irma. So I want to suggest to you that there are people who are less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling Dwayne Ebanks at 12 noon for Talk Today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.